Hello and welcome to this video on the Line 6 Helix LT. Part of the wider Helix range offers you all sorts of solutions towards effects and amp sounds both in the studio and live. The wider Helix range includes the Helix Floor, the Helix Rack, the Helix Control, the Helix Native, HX Stomp XL, HX Stomp, HX Effects, HX1, and the one we're looking at today is the Helix LT. It's packed with all sorts of sounds including drives, compressors, EQs, modulations, delays, reverbs, pitch effects, filters and wahs, and amps and cabinets. And they're all modelled after pre-existing devices across a wide range of brands, with their names changed to avoid any legal entanglements. And a number of these effects are legacy effects from previous Line 6 devices. A personal favourite of mine is the sweep echo from the DL4 delay unit, which we will have a look at in a bit. So in this video we will be looking at how to create a patch, introduce effects, edit those effects, assign those effects to a particular control switch, and creating snapshots. And once we've got all of that together, you'll see that that's how you can create a set list in your device so that you can take it to your live performances and have absolutely no problem getting all of the sounds that you want. And so in this video I'll show you a number of patches that I've created in the LT, the sorts of sounds that I'm going for, how easy it is to create them and edit them, and how it can all come together to make your recording and live performance experiences that much easier. So let's dive in. So what I'm going to do now is show you how to go about creating a very simple patch. How I'm going to do that is by using some software that comes from Line 6 as a desktop-based editor for your Helix. You can do it within the unit, but for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use the software. So as you can see here, there are two tracks. One of them is blanked out, as that the input is not accepting anything, any signal. And as we can see here in the multi, if we click this open, you can see that you can have all sorts of inputs. This means that any of the inputs or outputs on the physical unit itself can be turned into an input. So what we're going to do is keep the multi one, which is the guitar and variax. So if you had a variax input, that would be accepted as well. And we can see on the end is pretty much the same thing. Any of the inputs or outputs can be turned into an output. We're going to keep the multi out to keep things simple, and the first thing we're going to do is introduce an amp. So I'm going to go towards the end of the line here, click on this node where it brings up the full menu of all of the effects and sounds and so on that you can bring in. We're going to go down to just amp. I'm going to choose this Brit Trem Bright. I believe it's going to be modelling some sort of Marshall, and that sounds like this. Very bright and very kind of raw. So what we want to do there is add a cabinet. So go down to cab, let's choose a 4x12, and let's go to 60. What does that sound like? sounds a bit muffled. Maybe we can change one of them, the microphone. Let's change to another microphone, a ribbon. We've got more of a warm sound there. Let's go back to the amp and change, I don't know, the treble. Let's boost that up. What about the mids? Let's pull the mids up, maybe back the bass off quite a bit, maybe down to about 3.9, as we've got a very precise measurement there. Pull the presence up quite a bit. What have we got now? As you can see, we've got like the full range and the full control of the amp sound here. So let's just push the treble all the way. So you can get quite ridiculous, and let's bring it all the way down. A lot of control there, a lot of sounds that we can really sculpt at. But that's a very, very simple sound. So let's just, let's make it a bit more complex. So what we like in our sounds usually is some reverb. So let's go here, add some verb, a dynamic bloom, whatever that sounds like. That sounds insane. But what we've got, we've put the reverb before the amp. So that means the natural kind of distortion that is going on in the amp is now distorting the reverb. So we can just move that across. The reverb is now on the end. What does that sound like? So we've now lost all the distortion there, so it's reverberating the distortion. Let's put it between the cabinet. Does that do anything? And what about if we change it to something else? Let's add some modulation, maybe a simple phase. So what we've got there is a very simple sound. So let's put that into this new preset. Let's just call it demo. And there we go, and we can make that snapshot 1. But let's go to snapshot 2. Let's turn the modulation and the verb off. Now what does that sound like? Now we've just got the amp sound with the cabinet. But as we've seen, if it's in snapshot 2, as we saw at the top there, that's got that turned off. But if we go back to sound A, we've got those sounds re-engaged. So what we're seeing here is the beginning of a series of patches for a particular song in a set list. We could exaggerate that further. Maybe we could introduce a secondary amp for a third sound. So let's try that. So let's go to snapshot 3. Let's turn this amp off. Amps. Let's go something a lot more chilled out. Okay, so we've got a lot more of a cleaner sound. So if we go, that's snapshot 3. Let's go back to sound B. But what we can see here is that we've got both amps engaged. All we simply do is uncheck the amp that we've just introduced. So if we go back to C, we've got that sound that we want. And if we go back to B, it's remembered that we turned off that newer amp and we've just got the original kind of Marshall-y sound that we had before. What about if we go back to A? Both amps are engaged and we just need to turn that off. Super simple, really straightforward. As you can see, there's a lot of scope and a lot of sorts of sounds that you can create. Let's take it a step further. What about if we want to be able to turn a particular sound off within one sound? So we're going to stay on sound A or snapshot 1. I'm going to bring in a new sound. Let's add a distortion. A compulsive drive, whatever that is. That's really gainy, it's already kind of pressing against the amp that we've got already. So we've got that, we want to turn it off. So what it sounds like turned off is this. Back on. So maybe we've gone crazy and we want to add that ridiculous sound. So we're going to go into the bypass or controller assist. This looks a little bit different in the Helix unit, but it's not that different. We've already seen here that it's a selected bypass that we want to change. So we're going to keep on bypass and we're going to go down to foot switch 2. What this has just done is highlighted the button just above A, which is in orange, which is how they're color coding drive sounds. What this has now done is just enable us to just turn that sound on and off. So if you look into the editor, we can see that it's on, and now we've turned it off. So we've essentially added a sort of boost section to this one sound that we have. And you can apply that logic to any and every effect that you can add in. Maybe we can add 2 sounds in and controlled on and off with the same button. Let's try that. Let's bring in the modulation sound that we've got. Can we add 2? Now we've got the compulsive drive and the script mod phase all controlled with this one switch. As you can see, we can now bring in multiple effects from one button press. And applying that logic forward, we can have, of these 4 sounds, from these 4 banks that we've got, A, B, C and D, you can have so many sounds in there, bringing multiple different amps across multiple patches that you've got to create a lot of sounds, a lot of dynamic range with just in 4 sounds. So what you can see here is a slightly more complicated patch that I've created, but is essentially the same as the one that we've just seen. But this time I'm introducing a second signal, so it's more of a stereo sound. There are 2 reverbs which are identical. The amps and the cabinet, I believe, should be identical unless I've messed anything up. And there is also a delay on a parallel circuit on the top sound. So we have a kind of a wet dry sort of thing going on, and they're being blended together on that first channel. The output on the very end is panned in the middle, so we will just hear everything in one sound. And what I will do after that is then pan them left and right, so you can see and hear how that creates things as well, and how that changes things up to give you more strings to your bow if you are going to be using that sort of feature. And I've made a second patch within this wider bank. So let's listen to that. What that's doing is taking out one of the amps and the delay. What does that sound like? So as we've removed an amp, we've got that more direct DI sound. What about if we just turn that back on? So what we've essentially done is just taken out the delay. What I've also done is actually turned the delay into a assignable switch, so I can turn it off there. So we essentially have 2 ways of getting the same sound, the same result. So that just shows you how versatile and how much control you can have over your sound. Let's go to patch 3 within this. So what's that doing is bringing in the drive sound on the top channel. So we've got the delay back in. What have we got here? It's also turned the amp off. I think that's because I turned it off previously. As snapshots, remember the last thing that you changed. What I've also got throughout this entire bank is the volume control on the treadle. That comes with it as well. That's just turning the sound at the beginning of the patch, straight out of the guitar, straight into a volume control. So I can do these swells. Very simple, very straightforward. These are minor changes with each sound that we have, but as we've seen from the previous demonstration, you can get really dramatic by having multiple effects changed by one button push. So very briefly now at the end of the first patches, I've panned either channel hard left and hard right so we can hear what they're doing individually in a stereo mix. So we will have all of the delay on one side. If you wanted to do that and wanted to get that creative in a live situation, you can, if you have one side of your guitar image heavily delayed. What does that sound like? So you really do have a lot of control to create something strange and really out there, or a normal, boring guitar sound as well. Let's change things up and go to the next sound that I've created. What I've got here is an amp, a cabinet, a bit of reverb, and then another drive pedal that's activated on another sound. Exactly the same thing as we've had before, but just a more aggressive tone. So we don't need to spend too much time in this, but it gives you an idea of the range of sounds that the Helix has to offer. Really simple, really straightforward. So now we're going to move on to this sound 4 that I've got. So what do we have here? We have 2 channels, none of them connected, 2 amps, 2 cabinets, 2 distortions, but one of them has a pitch on it. But let's look at the amps first. These are a lot more high gainy than what we've had before. So this is going to be the most kind of biggest and leadest tone that we have. And the distortions are 2 different ones, a fuzz and an overdrive. But this pitch one is, we're going to have it turned off first. What do we have? So the pitch is actually an octave down, so we can split this channel left and right. If we look at the outputs, we've got on number 1, the pan is all the way over to the left, and the bottom one is all the way over to the right. So you're hearing fully on the left, just the top channel, and fully on the right, just the right channel. We can bring them into the middle. We can just make that 0. Make that 0, and that sounds like... If I take out the pitch while on an assignable channel, what does that sound like? And what I've also got on the treadle this time, instead of a volume, I've just assigned it to the position of the pitch shifter itself. So that sounds like... So in this patch we've looked at how we can have a wider stereo image and two channels having completely different kind of levels of drive, and how that can really maximize the kind of space that you're creating within your patches. Let's move on to something a little bit more wild. So what I've got in this patch are two pitch shifters, a bit of modulation, some amps, both of them being quite the heavy driven ones, some delay, reverb, and a cabinet. And before we do get into it, I've got a lot of these sounds on assignable buttons so we can turn them on and off as well. So we're going to start on sound 1 for this patch. What is this sounding like? So what I've got going on is actually I'm using the treadle to control the amount of reverb. So with it all the way down, as in heel down, just the delay you can hear from side to side. But bringing that up, there is the reverb. And also when I bring the treadle down, because of the positioning where the reverb is, I can then cut short those trails. So I can really have a lot of control over the kind of space that I'm creating. So the pitch shifters are both going up and down to create a wider, more thicker, synthesized, more synthy kind of sound. That's what I really like, to create strange sounds. The bottom channel is a normal, regular kind of driven sound with a bit of delay. So it's just a normal guitar sound with a bit of delay to give it some ambience, where it's kind of supporting the role of that stranger sound. But in the mix on the very end, if we look onto the panning, the normal sound here is actually panned all the way to the right, whilst the top one is just a little bit off-center to the left, just to give it its own little bit of space, a little bit of identity. It would be something to kind of, this sort of sound would be something that I would use to create a more synthy kind of pad sound if I wanted. So with the Sustainiac pickup in this guitar, I could create something a bit weird. And that's just the beginning of it. What else have I got in these patches? I've brought in some additional bit of drive for the kind of normal guitar sound one. What's that got in there? What that's also done there is killed the synthy sound and just focused on the normal drive sound. Because it's panned all the way to the right, it sounds a bit strange. What about C in this next channel? So what that is doing is pulling out those weirder synthy sounds and turning it into more traditional guitar sound. So it could just be a rhythm track. And then the last one with pretty much everything turned on. So there we go, that was a quick dive into what the Helix LT can do. As you can see, it's filled with amps, pedals, cabs, reverbs, anything and everything that you can think of to potentially replace your pedal board full of just individual pedals, or if you're looking to upgrade from a previous not as powerful multi-effects unit, it's got so much packed into it that we've only just about scratched the surface with here in a very simple demonstration of how to go about creating a very simple sound and scaling that up to a more complex soundscape, as it were. As you've seen within this demonstration, I've used the desktop editor to create all of the sounds and edit them as well. It is just as easy to do it in the Helix, but if you want to have a little bit of extra comfort and a little bit of extra peace of mind of doing it all correctly and seeing all of the patches that you've created in one go, I do strongly recommend using the desktop editor. It's free from Line 6 and it will help you get a lot more out of your Helix a lot quicker and a lot easier. Also, in the link in the description box below is a list of all of the sounds that is packed into the LT so that you can see for yourself and you can see what those pedals are based on. So hopefully this video has been really useful for you to help you get a better understanding of the Helix LT. To find out more about it, check the link in the description box below to the Fair Deal website. I've been Harry, and thanks for watching.